Bien, bonjour à tous et à toutes. Bienvenue dans ce webinaire dédié au blackout. Je m'appelle Rémi Bellegamire et je travaille chez Cluster et nous faisons ce webinaire dans le cadre du projet complexe. Donc, c'est un projet fédéral et donc nous allons le faire en anglais. Si cela ne vous dérange pas, il y aura certaines présentations en français et puis la dernière intervention sera en anglais. So, welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. My name is Remy from Cluster and I'm glad to host with our director Cédric Brul this webinar on blackout. So this webinar is organized by the Cluster. So for those who don't know us, we are an organization gathering about 250 actors on the energy sector, including academics, but also the industry, and which we accompany. We try them to actually to improve or to optimize the project that they do on the energy sector, but also on the water sector. This webinar is organized in a partnership with our twin cluster from Flanders, Flax 50, as part of the EcoFlex project I was just mentioning before. So on the rest of the presentations, we'll hear from our Pierre Henault from ULB about the academic perspective on large-scale outage and power networks. And then we'll move on to some questions on which Arod from Ilya and Thomas from Reza will try to give us answers on what is blackouts, what are its potential causes, and what is done actually to restore the grid. Arod Guisset is from Ilya, the transmission network operator, and Thomas Weber is from Reza, the DSO of the Liège province. Then the last presentation will be about the consequences of large-scale outages on the industry supply, with a focus on the water sector. And this will be done by Etienne Nils from IDEA and Frédéric Janier from IDE. So now I'll give the floor to Pierre Henault, who is our first speaker on this topic. So do not hesitate to ask questions in the chat box. So after every presentation, we could have one or two questions on which our speakers will be glad to respond. Please, Pierre, if you can share your presentation.
Yes, hello everyone. For that, Remy, you need first, okay, to stop sharing. Up. So, good morning, everyone. I'm Pierre Henault from, so I'm associate professor at the University Libre de Bruxelles in the field of electric power systems. Can you see my screen? Perfect.
Yes.
So, as introduced by Remy, I will give an academic perspective about the main causes of blackouts, so how they happen, and the countermeasure. So it's the two objectives of my presentation. And so I will first explain a little bit what is a blackout, how does it happen, and then to have countermeasures, it's first important to identify vulnerabilities and then to take measures to decrease the risk of blackouts. So first, I wanted to spend a few minutes about the definition of a blackout. So if you think about what is a blackout, there are different possible definitions. We can think about a local power outage. So if you don't have electricity at home, you can say it's a blackout. However, for me, and in the framework of this presentation, I will consider a blackout a complete loss of electric power over a large geographical area. So it's a large-scale power failure. So basically, if we have just a power outage at a local level, so at the level of a city block, I will not say in this presentation that it's a blackout. I will say, okay, it's a local power failure. What I mean by a large geographical area, I mean that it will involve the transmission system. So we will have an interruption of the transmission service over a specific geographical area. And so you know that the electric power systems, so the lower voltage levels typically in Belgium correspond to the distribution system. So when you have at home the connection to the low voltage grid, 230 or 400 volt, it's the low voltage. The distribution system operator will manage also the medium voltage up to typically 15 kilovolt. And then starting from 30 kilovolt up to 380 kilovolt in Belgium, it's the transmission system. So basically, what I mean by blackout is really that we will have a loss of the transmission system. So extra high voltage line will be without voltage over a non-negligible geographical area. And so you have an example here of a blackout that happened in the past, a little bit more than 21 years ago now. That happened so in 2003 in Italy. So you see here the map, so Europe seen from the sky. So you can recognize Belgium. There is a lot of light. You can see Paris as well, London. But then you see that Italy, continental Italy, you don't have light at all. Similarly for Sicily, although in Sardinia you have lights, but it's not connected synchronously to mainland. So this is what I call a blackout. So you see you have a total loss of power over a large geographical area. So we can wonder then how a blackout then can happen. So if you look such an event, the Italy completely in the dark, how it can happen. Basically, in a power system, you have often failures of grid elements. So, or if you look an overhead transmission line, you can have faults. So, for example, lightning strikes, or you can have faults with I don't know, with what is below the tree, short circuit fault. You can have also mechanical failure of the conductors. And similarly for underground cables, you can have also issue with the insulation. So you can have failures of elements that will happen in the transmission system. But normally, the failure of single element should not lead to a complete blackout. Why? It's because power systems are usually planned and operated according to what we call the N-1 security rule. So the N-1 security rule states that a power system should be able to endure the loss of any single element among the N initially active elements and to accommodate the new operational situation without violating operational security limits. So basically, you can have the failure of any single elements, and afterwards, you should not have any overload, you should not have any unacceptable voltage condition, you should not have any loss of stability, and so on. And so you see that basically because we design, we plan, and we operate in Europe electric power systems according to this N-1 security rule, we expect that after a single failure, we should not have a blackout. The system should be able to accommodate the new power flows and to supply all the load afterwards. But then, okay, if we can have single failures, we can typically have also multiple failures that could happen. And indeed, if you wait a time long enough, you will have in a power system multiple elements that can have a failure. But then to know if that could lead to that could lead to a blackout, it's important to look at the characteristic times that we can have in power systems. A first type of characteristic times are electrical transient, and so you have here the scale in seconds. So you see that electrical transient, you can have fast electrical transients a little bit slower, but it's typically between a few tenths of milliseconds and a few tenths of seconds. Other type of transients that you can have are thermal transients. So what I mean by thermal transient is that if you overload an element, it will heat, it will overheat with thermal time constants that are between a few minutes and a few tenths of minutes up to a few hours, depending on the element. Competing also with thermal transients, you can have the operator, the action of operators, the manual action of operators. So if you think to an operator in a control room, if something happens, the operator first need to understand what's going on, then to think about or to compute what could be the relevant actions to take, and then to implement the actions. So it will not be faster than a few minutes. So it could take typically a few tenths of minutes. And then you can have obviously these independent failures. So you can have two elements in your grid that fail for independent reasons. But typically the failure rates of elements are the order of magnitude can be once per year, sometimes lower for transmission elements, sometimes a little bit higher for generating units. But the order of magnitude could be once per year. That's typically the kind of thing that you can have. And so you see that if you have once per year, it means that if you have 100 independent elements, you will need to wait sometimes to have 2 independent failures arriving in time. And because you need to wait, in the meantime, actually, operators can take corrective actions. So it means that if all events are independent, blackouts should not occur in a power system because operators would have time to correct the situation. So following a first contingency, they would have time to re-prepare the system to face another contingency and to re-put the system in an n-1 secure state. And so you see that based on this reasoning, blackouts must be due to multiple failures, but with dependencies between failures. Otherwise, operator would have time to correct the situation. They will not just wait to have multiple failures leading to a blackout. And so to understand these dependencies, so what kind of dependency we can have, we need to analyze past events. I will not, because time is limited, I will not analyze tens of events. I will focus on only a very limited number of them. And I will take mainly the example of the blackout that happened in Italy that I showed you on this picture in 2003. And so it was actually the 28th of September in the middle of the night. So that's why we could observe that Italy was in the dark, that it's happened during the night. So to understand how it happened, we need to know what was the state of the system before we had failures in the grid. And so it was a moment basically where when Italy was importing a lot of electricity, basically from France, but because the electrical grid is meshed, a part of the power was going also through Switzerland. And so the initiating event, so the first failure that happened in the grid was the trip of a line caused by a tree flashover. So you see here on the map a line in red with a number 1. Number 1, it was the first failure. It's in red because it was 380 kilovolt, the nominal voltage of the line. Following that, so you see that you were importing electricity. So you had a power flow on that line. It's disconnected due to a tree flashover, but so power flows are going on other elements. So other elements were slightly overloaded. And so you can say, yes, but then was it really n-1 secure? Actually, depending on the way you interpret n-1 security, you can sometimes accept small overloads, knowing that you can correct the situation afterwards. I explained that the thermal time constant can be typically of a few tenths of minutes. And so if you have a small overload, before the line has time to overheat, you can take corrective action. And so in that case, the interpretation of n-1 security was that small overloads were acceptable for a short period of time. And so indeed, following that, the operators observed that some lines were slightly overloaded. and that there was a need to reduce this overload. So they tried to reduce the exchange, but that was insufficient. Why it was insufficient? It was maybe it was in the middle of the night or surprising. But they organized in several cities, like in Roma, a white night. So they had shops open during the night. So the electrical load was quite high on the power system. So they had some difficulties to really eliminate all overloads. So it was insufficient, the reduction of exchange. And so you see that after 24 minutes, a second line trip, the line number 2 in red. So again, extra high voltage, 380 kilovolt. And following that, because now we had two successive contingencies, before the operator had time to significantly reduce the power exchanges and to put the system in N-1 security. Then remaining lines were strongly overloaded and were disconnected quickly. And so in a few minutes afterwards, all the lines, so you see 3.1, 3.2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So all lines between Italy and continental Europe were disconnected due to overcurrent relays. That led to the isolation of Italy. Following that, basically, Italy was, before the event, importing a lot of electricity. Suddenly, Italy was disconnected from the rest of the grid. So Italy faced an imbalance between the generation and the load, which means that they had a fast frequency drop following the disconnection because the load was much higher than the generation. And you see on this graph, on one side, the power imbalance. So you see that the power imbalance following the split was around 7 gigawatts. And so in blue, you have the frequency drop. So the frequency dropped quickly. But then primary control acted and load shedding helped to stabilize the frequency. So you see that quite quickly, after a few tenths of seconds, the power imbalance was brought back to 0. But nevertheless, the frequency continued to decrease. So even if it was brought back at some point to 0, it became again negative afterwards because some generating units trips for various reasons. So they were exposed to a fast frequency transient, unexpected. And so they had internal problems. They had some difficulties to face that fast frequency transient, and they were disconnected from the grid by some protection system. So that led to a continued power imbalance. And so the frequency continued to decrease until it reached 47.5 Hertz. And when you go below 47.5 Hertz, basically all generating units have the right to disconnect to avoid mechanical damage. Usually they need to be disconnected from the grid, and it's allowed by the grid code. So at that point, all generating units started to disconnect, and the system fully collapsed. So you had a total blackout, and that's why you can explain that Italy was in the dark. So based on that and on the analysis of other past blackouts that we had, we can see that blackouts are due to what we call cascading outages. So basically, a first outage will trigger, or a first set of outages will trigger successive outages, like when you play with kids to falling dominoes, like you see on the picture. And so you see that you can have various cascading mechanisms. The first mechanism that we see in Italy is overloads, successive overloads. But we can have also misoperation of protection systems that can explain sometimes that a first fault can degenerate into an N-1 event, so the simultaneous loss of two elements following a single fault. We can have issues with voltage too low or too high, the frequency that can be too low or too high, as we saw in Italy, the frequency decrease that led to the disconnection of generating units and so on. Instabilities, we can have angular instabilities and so on. So we have various cascading mechanisms that will lead to the successive falling of elements in the power system. The problem that we have, or maybe the first one is actually a good thing, is that the falling probability of each domino will be usually lower than 1 because it depends on failures. So you can have unexpected behavior, but if in unexpected, it's basically you don't expect that behavior with a probability equal to 1. And due to that, we can have various different possible scenarios, which means that it can be quite difficult to predict what will be the accidental scenarios leading to blackouts in electric power systems. Another thing that we see in Italy is that we have a first phase was quite slow. So you see that you have a first event happening at 3:01, and then you need to wait 24 minutes to have the second event. But then after the second event, it starts to become quite fast. Everything will happen in a few minutes. So you see that the disconnection of Italy happened basically maximum 30 seconds after the second failure. And you see that then 3 minutes after the second failure, you have the total blackout, which means that thousands of elements were disconnected there in a few minutes. So you need to wait 24 minutes to have the second element disconnected, and then thousands of elements are disconnected in a few minutes. So you see that you have a slow cascade due to overloads, and then a fast cascade due to electrical transient and protection system. This is also what we observed in United States and Canada on the 14th of August 2003. So the map here, so the picture here is actually modified by computer, so it's not a static picture as it is, because you see that it's more dark in the area of the blackout that in other areas in Canada. But basically it represents the area that was in blackout in 2003. And you see where on this picture, the cumulative number of line transformers and generators as a function of time. And so you see that it evolves first slowly, and then at 1609, suddenly you have several hundreds of elements that are disconnected in a few minutes again. Sometimes you have also only a fast cascade, so because you trigger directly an electrical instability. And so you have an illustration of that in Great Britain on the 9th of August 2019. They had a major power failure, although it was not a blackout because the transmission system kept its integrity, so not a blackout in the definition that I gave at the beginning of this presentation. But the transport system was strongly impacted, and so you can see here trains stopped, Clapham Junction in the dark in London, and so on. And so what happened there? You had a fault on a transmission line, a single fault, and so normally that was cleared normally in 74 milliseconds, so a normal clearing time. So normally the system should have stayed stable, but some generated units were incorrectly disconnected by their protection systems. So a wind farm and a CCGT were disconnected. And you can see then on this picture the frequency transient. So that led to a severe frequency transient, and so low frequency demand disconnection to stabilize the frequency. And so you see that in that case, load shedding was not due to a slow cascade and a fast cascade, but directly due to a fast cascade. So several failures directly leading to an electrical transient. So this is a little bit how it happens. And so the question is then, how do we identify vulnerabilities? So what is important is to not only to estimate what could happen, what could be the different failures, but what are the final consequences. So if I have a cascading outage, am I going to have just a very local blackout for a city, or am I going to have really a large-scale blackout? And so for that, what we can do is to assess, to try to simulate the accidental scenario by simulation. We can simulate that using quasi-steady state simulation, so the power flow equation. So we'll assess after each event what will happen to the power flow in the grid, or we can simulate the dynamic behavior of the grid. You see that in blackouts, we have usually a fast cascade occurring at some time, so it's usually preferable to have a dynamic simulation to assess what will happen following outages. Different failures can happen with different likelihood of occurrence, so we need to adopt a probabilistic approach. And so what are the consequences? We can have a partial or a total blackout, or we can have simply loss of supply power, like in Great Britain in 2019. So when we try to do these assessments, we will be able to estimate risk matrix. So we can estimate the frequency of partial or total blackouts, the average amount of loss of supply power energy per year, and we will be able to identify criticalities. So what are the major contributors to the risk? What are the lines that are critical because if they fail, we have a high probability to have a blackout. And so the challenge is to identify these vulnerabilities by simulation is that it can be impossible to simulate everything in large power systems. So we need to try to select the relevant events and failures. Then computation times can become quickly unmanageable for large power systems because it will take time to simulate one accidental scenario, and we need to simulate thousands or even millions to have a good accuracy for the results. We can have issues with data availability. We need to model the behavior of protection systems, but then it might be difficult to know everything about protection system in the power systems. And then it can be challenging. Some modeling aspects can be challenging. So how do we model the action of operators? We cannot represent in detail distribution systems. How can we represent them in a simplified way? How can we account for new phenomena due to inverter-based resources and so on? So there are some challenges that are for the moment tackled by universities and research centers to try to develop meaningful methodologies to identify vulnerabilities. Once we have identified vulnerabilities, we can wonder how we can decrease the risk. We can have some measures to, so we can have the analogy with the measures to ensure deterministic N-1 security. So the traditional measures to maintain the desired level of security are in operation the dispatch, the use of topological action. So we can change the dispatch to reduce the overloads after a contingency. We can use topological action also to avoid overloads. We can set in other ways transformers, reactive power compensation, and so on. We can tune in planning, control, and protection. We can also have grid reinforcement. But beyond that, it will be also important to increase the situational awareness for the slow cascade phase, such that the operators can take corrective action if they have quickly a good awareness of what's going on in the grid. That will be then the topic of the next presentation. I believe we can have also defense plan and restoration techniques. So defense plan, basically to reduce the consequences. Once you start having a fast cascade, you can try to have good load shedding plans and special protection schemes to try to keep as much as possible the integrity of the transmission system, such that you will have load shedding, but you will be able to reconnect quickly if you stabilize the power system. And even if you have a blackout, if you have good restoration plan, you will be able to resupply quickly your customers, which means that the blackout will not be so much a big deal. So if you are able to supply in 1 hour, it may be, if you have a blackout in Belgium, it will not be 1 hour, but if you are able to reconnect customers in 1 hour compared to 12 hours, you see that you have a big difference there. So to conclude, blackouts are usually due to cascading outages with complex cascading phenomena. It's difficult to predict, but you have risk assessment techniques to identify weaknesses. You have numerous academic works on risk assessment methodologies. Nevertheless, you have now few applications to real power systems, but academia and utilities collaborate to try to improve these methodologies to be able to apply them to real power systems. Thank you for your attention. I see that there is indeed a comment from, can you remember your first name? Sorry.
Thomas.
Thomas, from Thomas, that you can find official public incident report on the website of NSOE. So if you are interested by how it happens, these reports are indeed quite interesting.
There is no question in the chat, but I have a general question because as you mentioned, that there is a complex cascade phenomena for the blackouts. But when we see there is an argument in the market, let's say, that we use the blackouts to maintain some fossil fuels gas plant or coal plants in some countries because they say we miss maybe some capacity plans. So it's an argument that it's more and more used to maintain some fossil fuels plants, and as well in Switzerland, because you have mentioned your example, there is a stop to blackout. It's 100,000 people that have signed a petition that it's called Stop to the Blackouts, and in the end they want to maintain nuclear plant. So we see that it's the blackout, it's an argument to maintain some, let's say, non-variable plants that could be nuclear, that could be fossil fuels as well. Do you think it's a good argument for them to maintain this type of plants, or when we see the blackout, it's not really the main topic for that perspective?
I believe yes and no. To which extent? Yes. If you are used to something, it's easier somehow to initially to maintain the reliability with what you are used to. But it doesn't mean that it's not possible to have the same level of reliability with another world. But so it's true that if you integrate without good studies and without care renewable energy resources, they don't have the same behavior. So you can degrade the reliability. Nevertheless, if you do your studies properly and you anticipate what could happen, and then if you can't have good control schemes and so on, in my opinion, you can have also the same level of reliability. Mm-hmm. Similarly, for black start, we are used to black start resources in Belgium. You have the coupling between Co and Tiange plus thermal black start resources. You can imagine also other schemes to black start the grid that are less conventional. Mm-hmm. If you launch that without care, of course, it might not provide the same level of reliability. But if you design your things properly, you can maintain. So yeah. I hope I address a bit your question.
Yes, thank you. So I take just another question before to go to the second presentation. So Ken, I think it's it's a good start of a scientific movie. So can some large geomagnetic solar storms also cause power failures or even blackouts?
So it's not completely my field of expertise, but the impact. So I know that indeed it happened in the past in Canada. I believe that a large geomagnetic solar storm caused issues with power transformer and a blackout. So I understand that we took learnings from that to reduce the possible impact in case it happens. However, I couldn't say what's the status in Belgium exactly. So I prefer not to elaborate on that myself. Maybe the colleagues from ELIA can know a little bit more.
But I think the answer is yes. It could cause power failures. Thank you.
Yes. I think it can, but as far as I know, it depends highly on the latitude. And in our latitude, it's not such a big deal compared to other countries. But as well, I'm not the expert in that topic, but I think that's an element.
Yeah, I can confirm this, Thomas.
Okay, thanks, Harold.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe let's move on to the second presentation. Actually, it was very interesting. I know about the 12 hours of Nuit Blanche. It was the first edition of Nuit Blanche in Rome, and actually, the event had to stop because there was this failure. It's quite quite interesting. Okay, now if you Harold or
yes, I will share the screen.
Sure. Yes.
Can you see the screen now?
We see the screen, yes.
Great. So good morning, everybody. Thanks for being today with us for this topic. So with my, I will say colleague, because with Elia we are almost colleagues, Harold, we will explain to you from our system operators point of view, our perception and some principles over the blackout. You will see some ideas will be complementary to what we have just seen, but we will try to focus more on the defense plan and the principle. But as you can imagine, it's quite a specific topic, and in 20 minutes we will have to go to the point and not too much in details. But if you have questions, for sure we will answer with Harold. So we will at first give some definition. You will see it's quite similar to the one we have seen, fortunately. And we will focus on the possible causes and the defense systems. So the first point will be, what is a blackout? And then we will see the two main times, I will say, of blackout. We will speak about sudden events, but also about adequacy issues. So that's two different topics, but can lead to the same problematic. And then, if that occurs, what do we do? How do we restore the grid after a blackout? And finally, some words about the way we are dealing security of supply in Belgium. So I will let the stage to Harold.
All right. Thank you, Thomas. So when we talk about blackouts, I think it's very, very important to keep in mind the European context. As you can see here on the map, Belgium is part of a very, very large grid and is connected from the south of Spain all the way to the north of Denmark. So really, the European context in this topic is huge. And basically everything that we do at the TSO level, at the DSO level, is imposed on us by Europe. Obviously, everybody is connected to the same grid, so everybody needs to provide the same level of defense and restoration, and everybody needs to align on what they put in place in order to defend the grid. And that is why here I took an extract from the netcode emergency and restoration, in which you can see a very precise definition of a blackout. So the system state is in blackout if 50% of the demand in the concerned TSO control area is lost. So I think it's fully in line with the definition of Pierre earlier on. So it's really a large area. It's complete loss. Although here it's within the definition, it's 50%, but it's very difficult to really assess whether it's 50, 49, 51, or even if the grid would still remain operable if we lose 50% of the demand. I think that's still a very big question. We're not going to test it, but it's still something that we question about this definition. So just a few notes that you can see down there as well. So blackouts are very rare. The last one in Europe was in June this year in the Balkans. So it remains still on our minds, of course. And in Belgium, we only had one blackout, and that was on the 4th of August 1982, so a very long time ago. And back then, also, only half of Belgium was in the dark, and the blackout was due to a failure in the test of the startup of a nuclear power plant. So in Belgium, we haven't had any blackouts since then. So a few words as well as an introduction on the different roles of Elia and the distribution operators in Belgium. So as you probably know, there's production on one side, a lot more production on the consumer side as well these days. But basically, the grid operators and Elia is transporting this electricity on the high voltage grid. And then RESA is distributing this to all the consumers, to the millions of consumers in Belgium on the distribution grid. And the main role of Elia here, next to managing those assets, is to guarantee the balance between the supply and the consumption, and guaranteeing this 50 hertz. 50 hertz is really the magic number in the TSO world. And this really indicates whether the production and the consumption are in balance, and that needs to be guaranteed at all time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. So it's a full-time job to guarantee that we always have just as much production as we have consumption. So as Thomas said in the introduction, we're going to talk about two big families of events. So we have the sudden events, for which we cannot prepare. And then we also have adequacy issues, which are more events that for which we prepare and for which we do a lot of analysis. But if we just take a first look at those sudden events, we can have sudden events which are not grid related. So the origin is outside of the grid. It's terrorism, it's storms, it's floods, cyber attacks, and all of that. And they can all impact the grid, and they could all cause a blackout if the storm or the flooding or the terrorist attack would be big enough. Because as Pierre fully rightly said, we always operate the grid in an N-1 principle. So if a storm knocks down one line, shouldn't be a problem. The grid should be still operable, and population should not be affected. But if a storm is big enough, floods are big enough, terrorist attack is big enough, and they take down more than one line, more than one cable, this could really put the grid in jeopardy, and this could cause a blackout if there is enough of those events, just as Pierre mentioned. Those events, yes, we have emergency plan to work on the effect of those events, but it's not really possible to prepare for them. What we can prepare for, or what we do analyze and what we do implement in the grid, are the sudden events which are grid related. And there are many different ones. I will take an example here of a system split. So what is a system split? It is an event where the European grid is not fully connected anymore. So the grid really separates in different parts. Here we have an example of a system split where the European grid was separated in two big areas. So it happened in 21. And the cause was a problem, an issue in a substation in Croatia. And so you have to imagine that a problem in Croatia is causing load shedding in France and Italy. So it really shows how interconnected the grid is. And basically what happened here, an issue in the substation caused, again, failures in different substations along the blue-orange line that you see on the little map. And basically the flows of electricity in Europe were disturbed, and one area went into over frequency and the other area went into under frequency. And so basically when you go into over frequency, you have to stop production. And so here, and so the different TSOs had the different defense plans in place, which lowered the production. But in the blue area went into under frequency because there was not enough production and too much consumption. And that is where the load shedding plans were activated and where load was disconnected in France and Italy, which restored the frequency. And the two areas then had to reconnect. So the balance in both areas had to be completely guaranteed before reconnection. And so that took around 1 hour. You should know that in this event, the population in Europe perceived nothing or almost nothing. The only people who were really impacted were the industrial load, which was disconnected in France and Italy. Other system splits, like the system split in 2006, was a lot worse, and there a lot of population was also impacted. So this is a slide to give some more information on this automatic load shedding plan. So how does it work in Belgium? In Belgium, we have 10 slices of different areas which we can disconnect. It's all over Belgium, those 10 different slices. And basically, if there's a sudden frequency collapse, then at a certain level here, so it's 49 hertz, the first slice would be disconnected. You should know that a lot of defense mechanisms are also in place in between the 50 and the 49 hertz. So a lot of other stuff would happen before we would activate the automatic load shedding. So the automatic load shedding is really a measure of last resort. After all other defense systems have failed. And basically, if the frequency keeps dropping even after the first slice has been shed, well, it's a second, it's a third, it's a fourth, and so on, until either the frequency is stabilizing and then we can go back to normal, or if all those slices would not be enough and we could not shed enough load, then the system would go in blackout, obviously. The frequency racks, which would disconnect load, they would react in 300 milliseconds. So it's extremely fast. It's not human doing this. It's really frequency racks which measure the frequency and which automatically disconnect the load if necessary. And basically, at European level, we have an obligation to be able to disconnect 45% of the load at any single moment of the year. I will come back on that later because that is really a big challenge at the moment. So this automatic load shedding plan was only activated once in Belgium. So again, it's very rare. And that was during the system splits of 2006. And there we only disconnected the very first slice of the demand disconnection plan. That was enough to restore the system and to get the frequency back to 50 hertz. So as I said, we have an obligation at a European level to be able to disconnect 45% of the load at every moment in the year. And this measure of last resort, this emergency brake currently is not working as it should be. And the main reason for that is the penetration of solar. So basically, those frequency racks are installed in substation from Elia and are disconnecting load on the distribution side. And what we see, of course, and I think you all know that, more and more solar is produced at distribution level. And when Elia disconnects a full substation, well, it is possible that basically the substation was actually feeding electricity because there was so much solar being produced that basically that substation was feeding into the Elia grid. And if we disconnect that substation on the wrong moment, we are actually disconnecting production and not consumption. So we need to adapt that plan. We need to evolve together with the energy transition. And that is where Thomas will explain what we're doing to solve this issue.
Yes, thank you, Harold. So here you can see a single line diagram of a typical substation. You have the high voltage here, then the transformers, and the medium voltage side here with the different feeders. And the way we are making the load shedding, as I will say, there is an interface between the TSO and the DSO. So typically in our case, between Elia and RESA, but the same with Ores or Fluvius, Sibelgia, and so on in other parts of Belgium. And if the frequency is dropping, I will explain the different steps. We receive via the interface the order to begin the load shedding. And at the beginning, it was not selective. It means that only the two incomers were, 1, 2, or 3, it depends on the substation, of course, but all the incomers were tripped, and all the substation was at 0 voltage. It was the first step, and then we make the clearing. So we open every circuit breakers from the feeders, except for some priority customer. I will explain that just the next slide. And then we ask Elia to feed the medium voltage bus bar again, and only the priority feeders remain energized. But the big problem was that even the priority customers had an outage, and that's what's not the best way to work, but it was like this at the beginning. Today, in most of the case, we have selectivity. It means that we are not opening the incomers anymore, but we only send trip commandos to the non-priority feeders. So that's very efficient, but it's not so easily in the practice. And we are even one step further, because just as Harold explained, with the decentralized production, it's complicated to identify which feeder are consuming or producing electricity. And of course, in case of a frequency drop, we only need to make some load shedding, not production shedding. Otherwise, the situation is even worse. So today, in our new substation, and every new substation or revamped substation is the same standard that is implemented. It means that we are selective, and we also make a real-time calculation in the IED, intelligent electronic device, so the protection relay typically. Just before tripping, the protection device is calculating, am I feeding or am I producing energy? And if I am producing energy, I will not trip. If I am consuming energy, I will trip. So in this case, we are sure that we only disconnect load. That's the new standard that is implemented in all substations. Look, we see was not selective. Today we are selective, and we are implementing selectivity with the direction of the power flow. Just some words about the priority feeders. So of course it's not us, RESA or Elia. We are selecting the priority grid users. It's the SPF economy, which is identifying typically the hospitals, the crisis centrums, and so on. That's the HPSGU, so high priority significant grid users. We also avoid to disconnect, that's normal, the auxiliary power of TSO and DSO, because we need to operate the grid. So if we are disconnecting ourselves, that makes no sense. And of course the producers. So not only the the solar PV and so on. But of course, if there is some wind parks and so on that are directly connected to the substation, this one will never trip in case of frequency drop. So that's the three types of priority customers: our auxiliary power, the producers, and the high priority significant grid users.
All right, thank you, Thomas. So if we now go to the second big cluster of events that we were going to present, this is about the adequacy issues. So those are the events that we can see coming, that we can analyze, and that we can prepare for. So when it comes to adequacy issues, that is where in the forecast we can see that the consumption is higher than the available production and the available imports. Adequacy issues is something that ELIA does every 2 years as well on a national scale for a longer period of 10 years. You can find those reports on the website of ELIA, where we analyze how much production we will need in the upcoming 10 years to make sure that we can have enough production, both thermal and renewable combined, to cover the consumption of Belgium. But it is also an analysis that we do on a rolling 7-day window. So our colleagues at the National Control Center, they analyze every week how much production will be available, how much consumption there will be in the 7 upcoming days. And if during those analyses there would be a problem, there would be a mismatch between consumption and production, there is a whole procedure with the governments, the National Crisis Center, and many different stakeholders, which is a procedure about scarcity. And in the event that we cannot solve this gap between consumption and production, then we might have to activate the manual load disconnection plan. And that would be something fully manual, as the name says. So it's not done based on a measure of the frequency, but it's really done based on what we see at the National Control Center, and it would cover the period where there's not enough production for the expected consumption. And so the manual disconnection plan consists of 8 slices, which are also over the whole of Belgium. And you can see here a snapshot of how much consumption could be shedded if we had to activate all of the 8 slices. So.
Okay, thank you, Harold. So as I've explained, we receive from ELIA, but in the end it's by the FPS economy. Regularly, typically it's once a year, an update of the high priority significant grid users. And we need to identify this customer. Typically, it's the EAN of the customer we received, and we have to check this EAN. How is it feed on our network? Is it connected to this or this substation? Because it's important for us to make the update of the local automatization in the substation. As I've said, some feeders are not tripped in the selective load shedding, but it's important to make it up to date. So that's how it works. Every year we have an update and we make it. Just for information, there are some other customers. It's not the high priority significant grid users, but some critical grid users identified by the FPS economy as well. But this one will be disconnected, but they are identified. For instance, all the Civiso industries are in this case. So they will not be. They will be disconnected in case of defense plan activated, but they are identified, and so if we need to reconnect them for some reasons, for some if the minister asks us to feed again, or some customers, we know where they are, and we do not in the urgency try to identify them and so on. So it's another kind of grid users. Now Harold will explain to you the two possible scenarios in case of a restoration.
All right, yes, indeed. So basically what happens if the system defense plan has failed, we have not been able to save the system due to a cascading event, and there is a blackout. Of course, at ELIA, we are prepared for that. We all our operators are trained on all the different scenarios that we can have to restore the grid. So this is all documented in the restoration plan. But there's two big families. So basically there's a top-down restoration and there's the bottom-up restoration. The big difference here is our neighbors. So basically if our neighbors are not in blackout, then we can use them to restore our grid. So we would start with a 400 kV backbone and then restore gradually the rest of the country. And that would probably be the fastest way to restore the grid. But let's imagine there's a full-scale blackout in the whole of Europe. Then we would need to rely on our own units. And as Pierre rightfully said, so there's CO. Obviously, CO is a very important black start unit. But then there's also other thermal units scattered around our country. And the TSO would contact them using blackout-proof communication lines. And we would restart the grid using those black start units. And you can imagine like an oil split that grows. So the grid would really be restored around those black start units and gradually be every substation, one after the other, would be re-energized. It is very important to remember that during a restoration, the grid is very weak and fragile, and any imbalance could cause it to trip back again. So that is certainly something that we need to keep in mind when we are restoring the grid. And also here, so also for the grid restoration, again, we are impacted by the energy transition. And so I think it's also something that where we also learned from the event in Italy, because the event that Pierre mentioned in Italy, the blackout, during the restoration phase, they were really impacted by solar. And solar really made their restoration very complicated. And that is why within ELIA, we have now a plan to do the restoration at 51 Hertz if we do the bottom-up restoration, because at 51 Hertz, small units like solar panels and wind would not be allowed to reconnect. So they would not reconnect automatically. And so we would avoid renewables for as long as possible and only reconnect renewables once the grid is stable enough. And then one last point from my side, during grid restoration, communication is key. And so that is why we have a very big project to install blackout-proof phones with all major consumers and producers in Belgium to assure that we can communicate at all times during a grid restoration as well.
Yes, so in the restoration plan, the TSO has the view of the high voltage network, and so he will lead the restoration. So he will choose which part of the country, which substation we will feed at first. And so as the DSO, we are following the instruction of ELIA in this case. But Harold said it very well. We have to be focus on not to destabilize the grid. So we cannot just refeed all the substation at one time, it's too much, and it's a risk. So we need to make a selection of some feeders based on the consumption, based on the priority, and so on. So it's really something very important. And our control center are trained, and we make some testing every month between Ilia and the DSO from alarm signals between our SCADA ADMS. So some alarm signal are sending back for acknowledgement. So there are some tests and trainings that's very important to be ready in case of, even if we all hope it will never happen. And we have secure communication, of course, between our dispatchings, DSO and TSO, to make it blackout proof. Blackout, just a slide to show that it is very a big topic, because in the past, for years, we have ad hoc work group in Synergrid. It was called, it was depending, sorry, on the CE 11. But since this year, it has become a specific commission dedicated to this topic, because we have seen that it was an ad hoc work group, but every month we meet and we speak about topics, updates of the plans, a suggestion to improve that, and so on. And it's really a dedicated topic. So in Synergrid, I guess you know Synergrid. It's a kind of consortium of the TSO and the DSO in Belgium. So we speak together to make it to make it more efficient, and it's the CE 12 security of supply electricity. So really, it's something living and improving every day. So that's it. I think the presentation is over. If you have any question, feel free to ask.
Thank you very much, Harold and Thomas, for this very informative presentation. It was technical, but actually, I think very important to understand what is behind our lights and our electro devices in our homes, and but also for the industry, it's good to know that everything is under control. Unfortunately, there are some heroes in the technical side to make sure of that. So there is one question from Gustave, who said that you have explained the consequences on the drop of the frequency. So that's happens when you have more production than consumption. So what happens if you have more consumption than production? That's his question.
Yeah, but I will answer, but probably I will, and I invite him to complete my answer. But typically, it's the same. If it's the same, it's the same problem, then the same risk in the end. Because if we have a too high frequency or too low frequency, in both cases, it's a problem. But the reaction is the opposite. It means that we will not do a load shedding in this case, but we can disconnect some productions. So that's also possible. But I think that the risk is less important in this case, I think. But I will let Harold complete my answer.
Thank you, Thomas. Yes. I think over frequency is a topic that is not new, of course, but we talk more about it at the moment because of again the huge amount of solar production which is coming. And so you might have read in the press about incompressibility, where we have too much solar production, and this could lead indeed because this we cannot control this solar production as well as we can control the big thermal plants. And so this could lead to the frequency gradually increasing. You should know that the frequency is the same in the whole of Europe. So it's not small Belgium that will impact it, of course, but if the solar production in the whole of Europe indeed increases and we cannot, let's say, use it or decrease enough the rest of the production, it could lead to indeed overfrequency. But in the reaction is a bit different, because shedding load, you need to really put it in place and really identify where you can do it. We are way better connected to the producers. So shedding production has originally been a lot easier because we are connected to every single large producer. But now we are less and less connected to the decentralized production. Yeah. And so that is a challenge again, in order to be able to disconnect as well this distributed production and mainly solar. Although that we should remember that every solar panel, every inverter should reduce its production once a certain threshold of 50.2 hertz is reached. So this is implemented, this is automatic. So if the production goes higher and higher at 50.2 hertz, the production will gradually decrease. And it's very important to gradually decrease, because if it would be a sudden drop, we could lose suddenly the whole solar production in the whole of Europe. And so this was done in the past, and then it was again evolved to have a droop, so a gradual decrease of the production once a certain frequency threshold is reached.
And just one more point, maybe from my point of view, it's also something more predictable than an outage on the network that can lead to a frequency drop. The sudden event doesn't really exist on the over frequency, because some prediction can be false, but in the end we have some indications. So that's why I say that the risk for me is existing, but less important.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen. We are running out of time. There is another question, and I have a general one, but maybe we should move on to the next speaker. In the end, we have about 20 minutes left. In the end, if we still have some minutes, we could come back to those questions. Thank you very much. And now we'll move on to IDEA and AID. This presentation will be given in French, I believe. And now I'll give the floor to Etienne, Miss. And Frédéric.
Voilà. Bonjour à tous. Est-ce que vous voyez mon écran déjà? Voilà.
Bonjour à tous.
Bonjour, voilà. Ici, nous allons aborder la problématique pour avoir un blackout donc, sur notre industrie, principalement donc, le traitement des eaux et le démargement. Bon, juste pour introduire le sujet, donc IDEA est une intercommunale qui gère environ 27 communes et regroupe environ 540 000 habitants. Nous sommes actifs sur plusieurs métiers, mais l'entreprise l'eau, l'énergie, le territoire, le métier qui va nous concerner ici principalement, est le métier de l'eau, sur lequel nous allons voir les répercussions d'un éventuel blackout. Le métier de l'eau, ça comprend évidemment des stations d'épuration connues du grand public, dont nous assainissons environ, en tant qu'IDEA, 38 millions de mètres cubes d'eau par an. Mais ça comprend également une activité de démergement que nous allons expliciter, qui est nettement plus critique en cas de démergement, en cas de blackout, et pour lequel nous pompons environ 16 millions de mètres cubes d'eau par an. Voilà. Pour l'IDE, qui sont mes collègues de la région liégeoise, je laisse parler Frédéric.
Parfait. Donc ici l'IDE, nous sommes une intercommunale qui nous occupons du démergement, que nous allons expliquer plus loin, mais également l'épuration, donc qui est venue par après en fait, et ce sur toutes les communes de la province de Liège. Donc voilà, ici quelques présentations sur les chiffres clés. Donc voilà, les 84 communes en tout cas pour la partie épuration. Et voilà, sur un territoire de pas loin de 4 000 km², nous sommes un peu comme IDEA, nous sommes à 280 collaborateurs, donc une intercommunale quand même assez conséquente en termes de personnel.
Donc maintenant, le démergement, qu'est-ce que c'est? Bon, le démergement, c'est un terme qui est très méconnu, c'est une activité qui est très méconnue. Bon, pour bien comprendre les risques d'un blackout, il est nécessaire un peu de remonter sur l'histoire. Donc en fait, la problématique du démergement vient de l'exploitation houillère qui a été très intense en Wallonie, donc sur le bassin qui va depuis Mons jusqu'à Liège, donc exploitation industrielle du charbon au 19e siècle, avec le développement de la métallurgie. Cette exploitation a été fortement mécanisée, de plus en plus profonde et sur une succession de plusieurs couches, avec une exploitation souvent faite avec pas ou peu de remblayage des veines exploitées, des techniques de foudroyage de galeries qui consistaient à laisser s'effondrer les galeries après exploitation. Donc tout cela a amené en fait à d'importants dégâts miniers. L'ensemble des galeries en fait non exploitées, qui n'étaient plus exploitées, se sont progressivement affaissées, et on estime que créer ainsi de grands affaissements en surface. On estime environ effectivement que 80% de l'épaisseur cumulée des différentes veines exploitées ont conduit à une différence de niveau en surface. Donc il y a eu en surface des territoires exploités, de la formation de grandes cuvettes qui est tout à fait artificielle, due à justement ces effondrements sous la surface. Les conséquences de cela pour la région de Mons, bon, ça a été un grand bouleversement de la géographie physique de la région. La formation de cuvettes dans lesquelles forcément les eaux de ruissellement se sont accumulées, elles n'avaient plus aucune possibilité de s'écouler via le milieu naturel, et donc il a été nécessaire d'étudier des solutions d'évacuation de ces eaux par pompage. De nombreux cours d'eau aussi qui descendent vers la Haine ne trouvent plus leur chemin naturel, étant donné que leur profil hydraulique était parfois simplement cassé par les effondrements, et cela posait évidemment des problèmes pour l'évacuation des eaux usées qui utilisaient ces rivières comme exutoire. Donc voilà, donc faute d'installation pompage, comme j'ai dit, les réseaux d'égouts sont devenus inopérants et les eaux d'égouts sont accumulées, et à des endroits on était arrivé à de véritables zones qui étaient des égouts à ciel ouvert. Donc en quelques décennies, il s'est avéré que la fréquence des inondations était devenue telle, elle était devenue annuelle, et qu'il était nécessaire d'entreprendre d'importants déménagements pour résoudre le problème, ce qui fut fait dans les années 50. Donc, voilà, à titre d'illustration, donc avant les grands travaux qui ont été entrepris, le village de Quelles, juste à côté de Mons, on estime que suite à l'abandon des exploitations minières, le niveau du sol a descendu de 12 mètres par rapport à ce qu'il était auparavant. Donc, comme on voit sur les illustrations ici, ça a conduit à l'époque à des grandes inondations. Voilà, pour l'IDE, je te laisse parler, Frédéric.
En fait, donc concernant la région de Liège, nous avons également connu des affaissements de terrain importants. Alors ici, nous principalement concentrés en fait vraiment dans le centre de Liège, là où il y avait les exploitations minières, et donc du coup aussi beaucoup d'industries et d'entreprises de tout genre. Donc voilà, ici on voit surtout que sur la zone amont de Liège, là où on avait en tout cas au début connu les plus gros affaissements, puisque c'est là où il y avait les plus grosses exploitations. Donc on a des affaissements également assez important. Ici, on voit des exemples. Donc, il faut s'imaginer que le terrain descend de 5 mètres. Donc, évidemment, ça a eu des conséquences assez importantes par rapport au niveau d'étiage, je veux dire, de la Meuse voilà, qui parcourt tout Liège. Donc, tu peux peut-être passer à la dia suivante, Étienne. Voilà, et donc évidemment, à un moment, on a fini par avoir de gros dégâts, et la grande alarme, elle a été tirée entre l'hiver, entre 1925 et 1926, où là, on a eu une crue assez exceptionnelle qu'on espère d'ailleurs ne plus jamais revivre, où le niveau de la Meuse est monté de plus de 6 mètres. Hein. Donc en fait, du côté de la Meuse, secteur amont, on va dire, on a une cote d'étiage qui est plus ou moins 60 mètres au niveau absolu par rapport au niveau de la mer. Et donc ici, on est monté à plus de 6 mètres, donc on a inondé évidemment du coup toute la plaine. Et donc sur la dia suivante également, donc on peut voir voilà ici également qu'on a eu des conséquences assez graves. Donc énormément de maisons étaient inondées, des immeubles ravagés, toute l'industrie était paralysée pendant des mois et des mois. Donc si on devait évaluer les dégâts au jour d'aujourd'hui, on pourrait les chiffrer à 250 millions d'euros. Donc c'est assez conséquent.
Voilà, donc de grands phénomènes physiques qui ont tout à fait bouleversé la région. Et donc, dans les années 50, il a été décidé de créer l'IDEA, enfin l'ancêtre de l'IDEA, qui a eu pour mission de tenter de résoudre globalement les problèmes de régime d'écoulement des eaux dans les zones qui ont subi des affaissements miniers. Donc, trois grands principes pour le déménagement. Bon, l'aménagement des cours d'eau principaux qui servent d'exutoire, l'aménagement des affluents également pour permettre justement aux eaux recueillies d'être évacuées, et enfin aussi la mise en place de drainage des terrains et des agglomérations de façon à pouvoir permettre l'écoulement des eaux par temps de crue ou par temps normal, étant donné qu'il n'était rendu impossible du fait de la formation des cuvettes. Donc, le démergement, ça a été la construction aussi donc, de 25 stations de pompage, uniquement dédiées ou principalement dédiées aux eaux de démergement dans les zones qui ont été concédées aux exploitations minières ou dans les zones qui ont été exploitées et qui avaient subi des affaissements de terrain. Voilà, je te laisse, Frédéric.
Oui, donc de notre côté, donc après les fameuses inondations dont je parlais en 1926, donc des mesures ont été prises nous par les autorités publiques. Donc il y a une réaction évidemment de l'État, ouais, donc, maintenant qui a été repris en fait par le SPW, mais l'administration des ponts et chaussées a pris toutes les mesures qu'il fallait pour régulariser correctement le fleuve. Le problème évidemment, c'est qu'en période de crue, les terrains s'étant affaissés, voilà, lorsqu'on était en crue, on avait des écoulements impossibles en fait des eaux puis vers le fleuve à travers le système d'égouttage. Et donc il y avait un reflux de ces eaux-là justement par les collecteurs en question. Et bon, en cas de période de crue, on va dire pour une crue faible, on risque de noyer. En fait, nous du côté de Liège, on est surtout très cassé de noyer les caves, dire en premier. Et puis évidemment en cas de crue exceptionnelle, là on pourrait inonder toute la plaine. Et donc l'administration des ponts et chaussées, en fait, elle s'était occupée de régulariser le fleuve, mais n'était pas enclin, je vais dire, à devoir gérer des stations de pompage. Et donc c'est comme ça qu'une intercommunale entre les différentes communes concernées en fait par le démergement s'est créée. Donc historiquement, nous étions l'AID, et c'est l'épuration qui est venue se greffer dans les années 80 et qui a fait que nous sommes transformés en fait en l'AIDE. Voilà, sur la slide suivante. Donc voilà, pour comprendre un peu les principes directeurs du démergement, le premier principe, en fait, on essaie d'évacuer directement en Meuse lorsqu'on le peut à travers des gros collecteurs qu'on appelle les exutoires. Donc ce sont des collecteurs étanches sur lesquels il est évidemment interdit de se repiquer. Et donc en fait ici, à partir de ces collecteurs-là, de ces exutoires, on évacue toutes les eaux des collines et des plateaux avoisinant vraiment le centre de Liège. Donc en fait, la quasi-totalité des eaux sont évacués sans pompage, et j'ai envie de dire c'est tant mieux, puisqu'évidemment lorsqu'on doit pomper, cela demande d'une part de l'énergie, donc on consomme de l'énergie, et de plus en plus il faut du personnel d'exploitation pour pouvoir entretenir les stations en question. Donc quand on peut rejeter de manière gravitaire, évidemment on le fait. Si on ne sait pas, alors sur la slide suivante exactement, voilà le deuxième principe directeur de l'AIDE, c'est d'utiliser alors on utilise principalement deux types de réseaux de collecteurs, nous, distincts sur le secteur amont de Liège, en tout cas pour l'évacuation des eaux de la plaine. Voilà, donc on a des stations principales et des stations secondaires. La station principale, en fait, l'idée, on le voit à travers le schéma ici. On a un mélange de collecte d'eau usée et d'eau de pluie qui sont évacuées directement par les collecteurs. Si on voit sur le petit graphique à gauche, si on est au niveau de l'étiage, il n'y a pas de problème. En fait, on peut rejeter nos eaux de manière gravitaire dans la Meuse, mais dès qu'on commence à avoir un niveau de crue qui commence à devenir assez inquiétant, alors là, l'eau revient par les collecteurs, et donc on ferme ce qu'on appelle les vannes à Meuse, hein, donc les vannes qui sont juste à côté de la digue, et les eaux sont alors déviées dans la station principale, et puis alors après, ces eaux sont évacuées par pompage. Voilà, donc ici, concernant sur les 84 communes, en fait, du côté de Liège, il y a 7 communes qui sont concernées par le démergement, donc elles sont listées ci-dessous. Un point important qui est sur lequel on est toujours insistant, c'est que les zones démergées ne concernent que les zones qui ont subi des affaissements miniers, enfin, dus à l'exploitation minière. C'est à distinguer d'une zone inondable, une zone qui, de base, voilà, a été considérée comme inondable. Donc ici, comme on dit toujours, il vaut mieux à la limite se situer aux zones émergées, puisque vous aurez plus de chances finalement d'avoir une station de pompage à côté qui peut vous sauver des inondations, de prévenir contre des inondations, qu'une zone inondable où on ne prévoit rien de base. Le démergement, bien comprendre en fait qu'il s'agit des dispositions voulues en fait pour prévenir contre les inondations sur les zones qui ont subi des affaissements dus aux exploitations minières.
Donc, avant d'entamer les conséquences d'un éventuel blackout, bon, quelques chiffres en vrac, on va pas tous les parcourir. Enfin, bon, quelques chiffres. Donc, les surfaces protégées, quand même, 37 500 hectares pour IDEA, 1 500 hectares pour la IDE. Des hauteurs, on l'a dit, d'immersion de 6 mètres, 13 mètres. Le nombre d'immeubles qui sont protégés, c'est quand même important. Chez IDEA, on protège quand même 126 000 immeubles, 15 000 à la IDE. On protège également 920 industries, 205 à la IDE. On protège les bâtiments publics qui aussi pourraient avoir des conséquences d'une inondation, 876 pour l'IDEA et 146 environ pour la IDE. Et en termes de protection de la population, ben, nous protégeons IDEA une population de 320 000 habitants et d'environ 37 000 pour la IDE. Donc, on l'a dit, chez nous, IDEA 25 stations de pompage pour assurer cette protection et à la IDE 45. En termes d'exploitation, ben, les volumes pompés sont assez colossaux. Donc, chez IDEA, on pompe environ 36 millions de mètres cubes par an et 26 millions de mètres cubes à la IDE. Donc, voilà, on est quand même sur des gros chiffres, avec en plus des défis qui viennent s'ajouter actuellement. Donc, un problème d'un déficit capacitaire des installations dû à l'urbanisation, aux pratiques agricoles, au changement climatique. Quelques défis aussi, l'élargissement des zones d'émergées du fait de l'urbanisation de zones industrielles, la sécurisation énergétique, justement, la remontée des nappes d'eau. Alors, au niveau d'un blackout, donc, comme on l'a dit, IDEA, c'est 25 stations de pompage avec une capacité de pompage de 310 000 m3. IDE, 48 stations de pompage avec une capacité de 380 000 m3. Évidemment, notre activité dépend essentiellement de la météo. Donc, on en a eu malheureusement quelques exemples récemment. Lorsque la météo est correcte, nos installations sont peu sollicitées. Évidemment, lorsqu'on est dans une phase de météo critique, un blackout pourrait avoir des conséquences dramatiques, étant donné qu'un blackout va d'office provoquer l'arrêt des installations, avec comme conséquence une accumulation rapide d'eau, des inondations, des inondations d'abord de caves, mais ensuite de terrain, et avec des temps de réaction qui peuvent être très courts. Nous avons certaines stations où, en cas de météo critique, si nous arrêtons le pompage, après 15 à 30 minutes, il est déjà trop tard. On est déjà dans une phase d'inondation. Voilà, donc la population peut également être surprise par des inondations soudaines, étant donné ces temps de réaction très courts, et donc seront mis en danger aussi bien pour leur sécurité que pour leurs biens. Deuxième conséquence d'un blackout, c'est qu'un blackout va provoquer l'interruption de toute communication. Donc, plus de communication, donc nous n'obtiendrons plus d'informations sur l'état des équipements que nous gérons à distance, plus d'informations sur les grandeurs physiques qui sont mesurées, donc les niveaux d'eau typiquement dans les installations, une impossibilité de gérer et de coordonner les équipes ou de les envoyer éventuellement où c'est nécessaire, étant donné qu'on sera tout à fait aveugle, une impossibilité aussi de coordonner les équipes et de communiquer avec elles à distance, et en plus, une impossibilité totale de prévenir la population des risques qu'elle encourt. Un blackout génère en plus également des risques importants pour les installations de démergement elles-mêmes, parce que, outre le fait que l'installation sera mise à l'arrêt, si elle est mise à l'arrêt pendant un temps trop long, les installations elles-mêmes pourraient être inondées elles-mêmes et être rendues inopérantes par l'inondation qu'elles n'ont pas empêchée. Ça peut créer une mise en service d'une installation qui peut s'étendre sur plusieurs mois, le temps de tout remettre en état. Et ceci est aggravé du fait que nous n'avons pas la possibilité d'installer de capacité de secours. Nous avons déjà eu des cas où nous avons dû installer une station de pompage provisoire, mais il faut de toute façon compter au minimum une semaine pour installer ce genre d'installation. Et en une semaine, les dégâts sont tout à fait sont présents et il est bien trop tard. Il faut aussi savoir que la protection civile et tous les pouvoirs publics n'ont aucune capacité de pompage suffisante pour pallier ne fût-ce qu'au pompage d'une de nos stations d'émergement. Les conséquences humaines d'un blackout peuvent être importantes et peuvent être même aggravées par le non-pompage des eaux. Évidemment, on pense tout de suite aux dommages matériels, dommages sur les habitations, les commerces, les industries, les hôpitaux, les services de secours, les infrastructures, les routes et les ponts, mais il faut également penser aux conséquences indirectes. Les hôpitaux seront inondés, les services de secours eux-mêmes, donc ils seront dans l'incapacité d'assurer leur mission et ce qui va encore aggraver plus fortement la crise. Donc les inondations en plus se font dans des endroits, dans des cuvettes, comme on a expliqué, donc générées par les affaissements miniers, qui ne possèdent pas de possibilité d'écoulement des eaux. Donc l'évacuation des eaux va être très lente avec une stagnation, donc des risques d'épidémies, de maladies, de contamination des captages d'eau potable. Et encore, mais j'ai déjà cité ce point-là, une autre conséquence, évidemment, est l'impossibilité de prévenir la population qui n'aura pas le temps d'évacuer suffisamment vite les zones à risque. Et enfin, on peut également citer les conséquences environnementales d'une inondation, évidemment. La pollution des eaux, les eaux non gérées vont contaminer les rivières avec des déchets, des produits chimiques, des effluents industriels. La dégradation des écosystèmes, des habitats naturels des zones humides et des rivières peuvent être irrémédiablement affectés. L'érosion des sols également, des terres arables pourraient être emportées par les inondations. Voilà, donc des conséquences très importantes, pas uniquement sur nos installations, mais sur la population environnante, sur les industries environnantes et sur des risques indirects qui pourraient être créés par le fait que ces installations elles-mêmes sont inondées. Une petite parenthèse concernant le délestage. Donc, je sais bien que délestage n'est pas du tout assimilable à un blackout, mais dans cette optique-là, au niveau du délestage, nous avons pris certaines précautions, étant donné que 17 stations de pompage sont alimentées par une boucle haute tension que nous gérons nous-mêmes et elles-mêmes alimentées par un poste Eliade qui dispose d'une alimentation de secours et qui, normalement, donc, ne devrait pas être délesté lors d'un programme de délestage éventuel. Nous disposons malgré tout de 8 installations de pompage qui sont délestables, mais qui ont été classées en sensibilité 2, de façon à espérer un réenclenchement rapide si le système le permet. Je te laisse parler, Frédéric.
Oui, tout à fait. Nous avons un peu un système similaire en fait à l'idéal. Donc, on a 37 installations qui sont alimentées par 2 boucles haute tension. Donc, en fait, du côté de Liège, on a un peu deux secteurs, deux secteurs amont, secteur aval, et chacune, voilà, a sa propre boucle haute tension qui est alimentée en fait par notre gestionnaire de réseau de distribution, le GRD, donc ici RESA, que M. Weber connaît d'ailleurs très bien. D'autres installations, en effet, sont directement alimentées par RESA, mais elles sont hors de la boucle. On essaie généralement de l'intégrer au maximum dans la boucle en question. Et alors voilà, ici, donc, l'entièreté des points d'alimentation. En fait, nos réseaux, eux, on a la chance d'être pris dans la tranche 0 vis-à-vis du centre de crise wallon, donc on est non délestable. Maintenant, attention, nos installations ne sont pas considérées comme des installations critiques comme les hôpitaux, par exemple, ce qui veut dire que si jamais on devait être délesté, même si on est en tranche 0, il faut quand même faire la demande auprès du centre régional de crise pour pouvoir récupérer l'énergie. Donc, il y a quand même un certain risque potentiel d'inondation pendant cette période de demande. Donc ça, pour nous, c'est très important, évidemment, de pouvoir dialoguer avec eux si jamais on était amené à devoir délester, de pouvoir avoir des stations qui soient le plus rapidement fonctionnelles possible. Voilà, on montre par la suite quelques exemples ici, comme ça on voit un peu les différentes stations qui sont alimentées dans un réseau de boucles, alimentées par différents points stratégiques de RESA. L'idée en fait ici pour nos stations, c'est toujours d'avoir une double alimentation, ce qui veut dire que si jamais on perd une alimentation d'un côté, on essaie de la récupérer, on peut la récupérer de l'autre, pour être sûr que nos stations fonctionnent toujours. Pareil ici, voilà, sur le secteur aval de Liège, voilà, ça permet un peu d'illustrer les différents réseaux que nous avons.
Maintenant, chez IDEA, comme chez l'IDE, nous sommes également organisme d'assainissement agréé par la SPGE. Donc, nous gérons également des stations d'épuration. Donc, IDEA est actif sur 5 bassins, sous-bassins hydrographiques. IDEA, chez nous, nous gérons 30 stations d'épuration et 80 stations de pompage servant à pomper les eaux usées. Et nous pompons environ 41 mètres cubes d'eau usée, donc environ une petite moitié sur la station d'épuration de Wamuel.
Plus ou moins les mêmes chiffres ici, avec 76 stations d'épuration, voilà, 110 stations de relevage et également on épure un bon nombre de millions de mètres cubes d'eau, dont la plupart est traitée en fait dans la station d'épuration de Liège-Pays, qui se situe sur le secteur aval de Liège en fait et qui est une des plus grosses stations d'épuration de Wallonie.
Donc là aussi, les conséquences d'un blackout sur l'épuration des eaux, ben, l'ensemble des eaux qui arriveraient pendant le blackout seraient directement amenées vers le milieu naturel sans aucun traitement. Donc ça entraînerait une pollution organique et une pollution par les déchets du milieu naturel. Évidemment, le non-respect des directives européennes en la matière. Et si le blackout dure un certain temps, quelques heures, donc typiquement entre 4 et 8 heures, ben, la mort des bactéries qui assurent le traitement biologique des stations, ce qui est particulièrement critique parce que remettre en service une station dont le lit bactérien a été tué peut reprendre plusieurs semaines avant d'être à nouveau pleinement opérationnel. Donc, pendant ces semaines, la station sera non conforme et polluera le milieu naturel. Donc, un blackout important peut avoir des conséquences vraiment graves sur la qualité des masses d'eau que nous traitons. Voilà, j'en viens au terme de cette présentation. S'il y a des questions, je suis à votre disposition.
Merci beaucoup pour cette presque mise en situation. On peut seulement s'imaginer les conséquences. Quand on parle de 12 heures de blackout en Italie, on n'ose pas imaginer ce que cela a pu conduire comme conséquence, hein. Donc, 362 000 habitants, 79 stations de pompage et 8,6 TWh de consommation par an. C'est quand même énorme, hein, sur vos trois sites IDEA,
Oui.
AIDE et YTech. Donc, voilà, on sent que ça touche à pas mal de secteurs, comme venait de dire Cédric. Donc, on voit que voilà, 15 à 30 minutes suffisent pour arriver à des catastrophes, mais heureusement que le, le système est résilient, on espère qu'il va continuer à l'être. Donc, je ne sais pas s'il y a des questions à nos deux derniers intervenants dans la salle. Je ne vois pas. Ok. Mais en tout cas, mais merci beaucoup pour cette mise en situation, hein. On s'imagine un peu plus quand on a des retours de terrain sur l'importance en tout cas de résilience. Et on sent qu'aussi il y a beaucoup de potentiel dans le secteur de l'eau pour servir le réseau en termes de stockage d'énergie qui peut profiter à la flexibilité du réseau, hein. Il y a une certaine cartographie qui a été établie en Wallonie pour le pompage sur linage. Donc, on sent que le secteur de l'eau joue un très grand rôle. Ok, je pense que s'il n'y a plus de questions, on va conclure. We come to the end of our webinar. Just to conclude, I would say that yeah, it has been very interesting. The presentations will be sent. If you have more questions, do not hesitate to reach out to us or to send your questions to the speakers. This is the last webinar of the year. It's close to 3. But we have a last event of the year. This one will be in Liège on renewable energy communities, the perspectives in Wallonia and Belgium. If you haven't registered yet, you can maybe contact my colleague Philippe Judon. I suppose the registration is now closed because we kind of reached the number, but if you are a member of TREAD, of course, we will try to have you on board. And after that, we have another webinar on the hydrogen, a workshop on safety, certification, and permitting for hydrogen infrastructure. That will be on 24th of January next year. And then our General Assembly will be in April, the 1st of April. This is not Poisson d'Avril. Be there with us, so you can already we can already register to participate with us. And last but not least, we are planning a mission in UK where we try to bring our members to participate to this big venture. And it's in collaboration with Wallonie Export Investment and WBI, Wallonie Brussels International, in partnership with Green Wind. All the information, of course, can be found on our website. So thank you again for participating, and we hope this was interesting for you, and see you next time. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Merci.